Here's what's coming up on The World Today. Russia's EU ambassador says the country believes that diplomacy can help de-escalate the crisis over Ukraine. US troops set to be on their way to reinforce NATO's eastern flank in Romania. Plus, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson announces intentions to end COVID self-isolation requirements for this month. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Amarachi Ubani in Lagos. We continue to monitor updates on the crisis between Ukraine and Russia. We're learning now Russia is eager to find a diplomatic solution to quell the tensions. The country's EU ambassador, Vladimir Shizov, a while ago told British media his country still believes diplomacy can help de-escalate the crisis over Ukraine. He, however, did not say whether Russia plans to move the 100,000 troops massed on the border with Ukraine, but asked why no one is talking about the number of Ukrainian soldiers directly facing Russia. His comments come after a couple of days of flurried diplomatic activity in Russia and in Ukraine by French President Emmanuel Macron. President Macron had, after his meeting with President Volodymyr Zelensky, said there is some suggestion that a renewed focus on the so-called Minsk agreements, which sought to end the conflict in eastern Ukraine, could be used as a basis to defuse the current crisis. The accords are backed by Ukraine, Russia, France and Germany between 2014 and 2015. President Macron says talks would be revived as early as Thursday and include Russia and Ukraine along with France and Germany, known as the Normandy Quartet. Both sides appear to be on the same page as to resolving the crisis between them. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba today said Ukraine believes there is still a chance of resolving the West standoff with Russia through diplomacy, but that there are already grounds to impose sanctions on Moscow. The United States and the European Union have both threatened Russia with new sanctions if Russia does attack Ukraine. President Zelensky has said Ukraine needs actions to be taken against Russia before any attack. Kuleba himself says Russia has already violated international law and that this provides a basis for imposing sanctions. He was referring here to Russian passports being issued to some Ukrainians in separatist-controlled areas of eastern Ukraine. Over 700,000 Russian passports have been issued to residents of eastern Ukraine since separatists seized the territory in 2014. And Russia's parliament is set to discuss making an appeal to President Putin to recognize the breakaway areas as independent states. So what else is going on? The U.S. is sending its 2nd Cavalry Regiment in Romania to reinforce NATO's eastern flank. Now, according to the regiment's leader, Colonel Joe Ewer, the purpose of the deployment is to assure allies, to deter adversaries, and to stand ready to defend NATO alliance. So far, the length of the mission is undetermined, but soldiers from the regiment arrived at Mihail Koganescu International Airport in Romania on Tuesday. The 2nd Cavalry Regiment has its garrison in Vilsek, the southeast of Germany. Staying with the region, Lithuanian president says he will be asking the United States to permanently station troops in the country to help boost security. President Gitanas Nausėda said this after welcoming a new rotation of German international NATO battle group deployed in 2017 and soon to include 350 additional German troops in response to Russia massing its troops near Ukraine. Since 2019, the United States has deployed non-overlapping rotations of its own groups of about 500 troops and equipment in Lithuania, adding to the alliance's efforts to deter Russia from its vulnerable flank. Nausėda said the move to ask the troops to stay permanently will be the best boost to security and deterrence that NATO could provide, not only to Lithuania, but to the whole region.
NATO's enhanced forward presence also shows that our alliance can adapt to meet any challenge at any time. And this is more important today because we see Russia's continued military buildup in and around Ukraine and movement of forces into Belarus. So the risk of conflict remains real, and NATO continues to call on Russia to de-escalate. We are a defensive alliance, committed to finding a political solution to the crisis, and we commend the diplomatic efforts underway. We also be always ready, if necessary, to protect and defend all allies from all directions and from all threats.
While the Lithuanian president hosted NATO's deputy secretary, the foreign minister Gabrielos Landsbergis says countries need to strengthen ties and regulations to counteract disruptors Russia and China. China has downgraded diplomatic ties with Lithuania and pressured multinationals to sever links with the Baltic state after it allowed Taiwan to open a de facto assembly in Vilnius. The European Union launched a challenge at the Geneva-based body last month, accusing China of discriminatory trade practices against Lithuania that it says threaten the integrity of the EU single market. Landsbergis was in Australia to open the country's first embassy. He says he welcomes Australia's backing of the trade case.
Tools and
Most friends are okay with us demasking up here.
Therefore, I very much welcome Australia joining the consultations that were started by EU in WTO. And I think we need to remind countries like China or any other country that would wish to use trade as a weapon, that the like-minded countries across the globe, that they have tools. That they have tools and regulations that help withstand the coercion and not to give into political and economic pressures.
But I absolutely agree with Gabrielos in relation to the importance of like-minded nations who are interested in the operation of the international rules-based order, who are interested in free and open trade, who are interested in openness and transparency, in security and stability, working together and being consistent in our approach on these issues. There are many colleagues with whom the Foreign Minister and I work and engage on these issues, and the more that we are able to share our views and to articulate our views together, as we are doing today, the more I think we are sending the strongest possible message about our rejection of coercion and our rejection of authoritarianism.
I want to bring in former Permanent Secretary of the Nigeria Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Joe Keshi. He joins me now from Abuja. Ambassador, thank you for joining me on The World Today.
Marichi, good afternoon or good evening. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you, Ambassador. Do you believe that Russia wants a diplomatic solution to the crisis with Ukraine?
I believe so. I want to believe so because I'm sure those who have studied Putin over the years have insisted that Putin is not a gambler. Some have described him as being very strategic in the way he does things. And I believe that some of the actions he has taken so far, it's part of his own strategic moves to drive home his demands and his points. But whether he would eventually end up going to war, I've never believed he would go to war anyway, but it's almost possible that he could actually eventually go to war. The danger of what has happened is that actually war could start without even the president, could start by accident.
Yeah, indeed. And I want to talk about the strategies that's been employed by both the United States and France. You see the U.S. deploying extra troops to Europe, and then the French president is working shuttle diplomacy between Russia and Ukraine to get the Normandy quartet eventually to meet tomorrow. What does that speak to as regards what each wants from the situation at the end of the day?
You know, since NATO was formed, France since de Gaulle, has always insisted in an European defense, what do I call it, being able to defend itself. And when it comes to the issue of European defense, France has always tried to ensure that Europe speaks for itself and secure American support, not that the Americans take the leadership and Europe just simply, or NATO simply follows. So I think that what you are seeing here is that, yes, the allies are united with the United States on what to do, but they are pursuing different diplomatic, moves in the hope that anyone that achieves their desire, both are intended to actually achieve the same desire, which is to ensure that Russia does not invade Ukraine. So what you are seeing the French do is simply, what the Americans are doing to start with, is simply to let Russia know that it will pay a price. It's deterrent to convince Russia that it will be a mistake to go into Ukraine. The French, on the other hand, are trying to convince the other Europeans that, yes, we can actually achieve some diplomatic result by engaging Russia, and convincing Russia also that it will be a mistake to invade Ukraine. So they are pursuing the same policy, but in a different way. The result is the same: to prevent Russia from invading Ukraine.
And I want to talk about Russia's demands here, which is, why we're in this crisis in the first place. Among a series of demands that Russia has made, Russia wants guarantee that Ukraine will never become a member of NATO. But Western countries are insisting Ukraine is a sovereign country and can make decisions about its own security arrangements. Ukraine has not been admitted to the European Union either. So what would be most beneficial for Ukraine at this time? Make friends with the West and enemies with Russia, or make its own decisions? And I mean, what's wrong with making friends with Russia at the end of the day?
Two or three things. Number one, I think we have to respect Ukraine as a nation and allow Ukraine make its own decision whether to join NATO or not to join NATO. And I'm not aware that Ukraine, look, joining NATO is a long process, and I do not see Ukraine, at this timing point, deciding to join NATO anyway. That's number one. Number two, what Putin has done, amassing such a huge military, men and women, materials around the borders of Ukraine is not very helpful. And in fact, it has actually made Russia, as of today, very insecure, because the Americans and almost all the NATO member states have moved troops closer to Russia than it was before this conflict started. In other words, you have more NATO troops almost surrounding Russia or close to Russia than they were before. Today, the American government is moving more troops to Lithuania or somewhere there, and they've moved other troops around the region, and these are all very close to the Russian border. So if Russia has not taken the steps it took a few weeks ago to begin to amass troops on the borders of Ukraine, this will not happen. And I think here, I sincerely hope at the end of the day that Putin will look back at what he has done and realize that he may have made a mistake. I doubt if that would be the way he will look at it. But moving troops to the border for him was to ensure that the rest of the world, particularly Europe and the Americans, take him seriously in his demand that Ukraine must never be a member of NATO. But it is at the end of the day, it is Ukrainians who have to make that decision. This is why in the responses from EU and from the United States on this issue, they made it very clear that they cannot speak for Ukraine. Ukraine has to speak for itself and take its own decision based on its own national interest.
Thank you, Ambassador. Well said, and thank you for your analysis on the issue.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
We'll take a short break on the program. We have more stories coming up, including this one. And how cute do they look? They're really cute, aren't they? Teams Rough and Fluff, playfully preparing to compete at the 18th Poppy Bowl somewhere in the United States. Yes. Welcome back to the programme. We're checking in on political events in the UK. Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he intends to end the legal obligation for people in England to self-isolate if they test positive for COVID-19 later this month, when it gets out the government's strategy for living with the disease. The requirement is currently due to lapse on March 24th, and Mr. Johnson had previously said he would look to bring the end of the requirement forward if he could. During today's Prime Minister's questions, opposition Labour Party lawmaker Fabian Hamilton asked Johnson about a newly merged photograph apparently showing the Prime Minister in Downing Street in December 2020 with a staff member wearing tinsel and an open drinks bottle on the desk. The Prime Minister fired back. He is completely in error when asked if he would refer the events to the police for investigation. Mr. Johnson's leadership credentials have been badly tarnished by controversies and missteps in recent months, leading to calls from some of his own lawmakers for him to resign.
Number one, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I can tell the House today that it is my intention to return on the first day after the half-term recess to present our strategy for living with COVID. Provided the current encouraging trends in the data continue, it is my expectation that we will be able to end the last domestic restrictions, including the legal requirement to self-isolate if you test positive, a full month early, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend is quite right, because the protocol does not require, contrary to the way it is being applied by our friends, it does not require that all foods and all medicines and all plants should be systematically checked in the way that they are, Mr. Speaker. And we must fix it, and with goodwill and with common sense, I believe we can fix it, Mr. Speaker. But if our friends don't show the requisite common sense, then of course we will trigger Article 60.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition.
Our London correspondent Juliana Olaika joins us now. Juliana, well, the Prime Minister there explaining the strategy on living with COVID. So explain to us how this is different from the COVID rules regarding self-isolation that already exist.
Good evening, Amarachi. I think a lot of people were taken by surprise from the Prime Minister's announcement that all COVID restrictions will be taken off early. I think if we go back to last summer, Britain became one of the first rich nations in the world to remove all restrictions, apart from having to self-isolate for 10 days. It was shortened to 5 days. If you were tested positive, then all of a sudden Omicron came about, and we've had these Plan B measures that have subsequently been lifted. But again, Britain does want to emerge out into society again. They want people in the community to treat COVID like the common cold. The Prime Minister just said, and we just played him saying that after recess, after looking through all of the data, hospitalizations, we know, are much lower than had previously been forecast. The amount of people testing positive with Omicron has reduced week on week. I believe there were 66,000 reported cases yesterday. In the week before, there were over 100,000. So it is a strategy to get the economy back going. Some critics would say that perhaps the Prime Minister is trying to distract people, but I think lots of Britons will be happy with this. However, we shouldn't forget, those elderly, those vulnerable, those in the community that are still at threat of getting COVID and getting seriously ill.
Indeed, we must not forget we're still living with the coronavirus. But can Mr. Johnson catch a break, Juliana? A party in December in 2020, this is not part of Sue Gray's report, is it? And then we hear those rumblings in Parliament that have translated to votes against the Prime Minister. How many against him now?
Well, yes, it is very, very serious. This Partygate scandal just won't go away. It is engulfing Whitehall and Downing Street. It's seen the resignation of 5 of the Prime Minister's most senior aides. But Boris Johnson remains defiant. I think, there are reports that he was heard singing "I Will Survive" to a new recruit. And apparently he said it would take an army tank to get him out of 10 Downing Street. But there was another piece of evidence exposed by the Mirror newspaper during Prime Minister's questions. An opposition MP obviously had the evidence from social media, which shows the Prime Minister in a room with a civil servant wearing some tinsel, There's an open bottle of champagne on the desk, as well as some food. Was this not a party? This event, this gathering, has been mentioned before. It was a Downing Street quiz in the run-up to December, when again most people were following, well, the vast majority of people were following the rules. At the moment, we believe there are about 40 Conservative MPs who have handed in a letter of no confidence to the 1922 committee chair, Philip Brady. So
Right.
we just have to wait and see. But yes, these issues are not going away.
Indeed. And there was a report this morning, Julian, about Brexit affecting cost and delay paperwork at the borders. Apparently, Britain is yet to begin to enjoy the benefits of Brexit. Am I right?
Yes, you are absolutely right. There are queues at the border, which we've seen for days upon days. There was data today showing that trade between Germany and Britain is falling. But I've got to say, just very briefly, Amarachi, that the big story of the day is the cost of living squeeze and high inflation rates. There's some really shocking data suggesting that in the past month, over 1 million adults in the UK have gone without food in 24 hours because of this issue. There are lots of policy legislation items that the Prime Minister should be getting on with, but unfortunately he's under a police criminal investigation and intense scrutiny, not only from the backbenchers but from the opposition Labour Party too.
Yeah, and when we're talking about this sometime last year, there were concerns about, whether certain products would get to Britain before the Christmas and New Year holidays. But I guess that evens out now. Thanks again, Juliana. Police in Canada have arrested some demonstrators in the country's capital, Ottawa, nearly after 2 weeks of a trucker-led anti-vaccine mandate protest. The capital has been under a state of emergency as we speak. Protesters blockaded the city's centre with trucks and cars. Here's more of the situation in our global report.
Canadian authorities are scrambling to find ways to end the 12-day-long occupation of the national capital's downtown, hoping a combination of criminal charges, traffic tickets, and the prospect of losing access to fuel will end the blockades. Police say the number of protesters in Ottawa against public health measures to fight COVID-19 is dropping in the face of tougher policing and a 10-day injunction. Meanwhile, inspired by protesters in Canada, demonstrators have gathered in southern France for what they say will be a freedom convoy that will converge on Paris and Brussels to demand an end to COVID-19 restrictions. About 200 protesters assembled in a parking lot in Nice and France's Mediterranean coast, with many displaying Canadian flags in a nod to the truckers in Canada who are protesting their government's COVID-19 restrictions. In New Zealand, hundreds of people protesting against vaccine mandates and pandemic restrictions have blocked streets outside the parliament for a second day. A heavy police line was deployed in front of the parliament building to stop protesters from entering. According to local authorities, 3 arrests were made as protesters tried to break through a country of 5 million people. New Zealand has had about 18,000 confirmed COVID-19 cases so far and 53 deaths. Officials at the WHO's Eastern Mediterranean Regional Office says Middle Eastern countries have seen a rise in coronavirus infections in the last 6 weeks because of low vaccination rates. Reported COVID-19 cases have risen to a daily average of 110,000 in the past 6 weeks, while average daily deaths rose to 345 in the last 3 weeks. Over the past 24 hours, Hong Kong's daily COVID-19 infections nearly doubled to a record 1,161 as the global financial hub battles a rapid surge that is shaping as the biggest test yet of its dynamic zero policy. The city has reported close to 4,000 infections over the past 2 weeks, up from just 2 in December, taking its tally to more than 17,000 since the outbreak began in 2020, with 215 deaths, although the figures are lower than other major cities in the world.
Here into the program now, the cuteness it is, the Poppy Bowl is returning for its 18th year on Super Bowl. There they are, and they're just really cute. This year's show will feature a record 103 puppies. In addition, there are 9 pairs of puppy siblings with 51 shelters from 23 different states in the United States represented. Our producers aim to entertain. The main goal is to raise awareness about pet adoption. At the end of each break, puppies currently available for adoption will be shown during the program. The 3-hour special will be streamed on Discovery Plus and on air in the U.S. network Animal Planet. Well, something dog lovers need to look forward to. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.